So you're making an awakening ninja and want to learn how to PvP with him. Well, I might be able to help with a thing or two. In this video, I'll try my best to give you a crash course on the fundamentals of PvPing with ninja. I'm known as College Tuition, or All Luck No Skillz, and this is my ninja PvP guide based on how I play the class. Catches. In BDO, combat heavily revolves around crowd controls, or CCs for short. Your CCs are skills that stiff, stun, float, bound, or knock down. There are no CC breaks, so landing any single CC can lead into a combo, and the combo usually guarantees a kill. This means whoever catches their opponent with a CC first will generally win the fight. So fights will largely involve both players trying to CC each other, while avoiding getting CC'd themselves. There are three ways to avoid CCs. Iframe, which blocks out CC and damage. Super Armor, which blocks out CCs, but doesn't block damage. Or Frontal Guard, which only blocks CCs and damage from the front. So to land a CC on your opponent, you will want to know not only just which of your skills CC, but also how to use them to bypass your opponent's defenses. In other words, you'll want to know what your win conditions are. Well, as a ninja, your main win condition is to get behind your opponent's Frontal Guard. Keep this in mind, because this is very much going to be the main motif of ninja that you'll see in every fight. No matter how you ultimately end up catching them, it all starts with getting behind your opponent. So let's look at some ways to do that. Blockjump. Probably the most iconic and straightforward ninja skill. Use the Shift Q into W to instantly teleport behind your opponent and stiff them. You can even delay pressing W for a bit and you'll stay in iframe, but just don't wait too long as there is a time limit. Smokescreen. You may be tempted to use this skill with quick slots, but it's actually much better to use spacebar and chain it off of another skill. And you can even do this with certain movement skills like Ninja Step. So by combining Ninja Step with Smokescreen, you'll be able to land Smokescreen behind someone by doing WR and B into spacebar. Shadow Stomp. This skill has the fast version and the slow version, but almost every time you're going to want to use the fast one. In order to use the fast version, there are certain skills you have to chain off of. The most common one is Shuriken Throw. So you would Shuriken Throw first, then Shadow Stomp, RNB, then SE. However, this skill only attacks forward in the direction that you're facing, so you're also going to have to combine it with a movement skill to first get behind your opponent and then quickly perform a camera turn before Shadow Stomping. You can also activate the fast Shadow Stomp by directly chaining it off of Ghost Step, Ghost Greeting, or even Smokescreen. So if you use one of these skills to get behind your opponent, you can then skip the Shuriken Throw to get an even faster Shadow Stomp. You can also chain it off of Lick Sweep and Shuriken Flight, but their uses are much more situational. Beheading the Dead. The idea here is the same as with Smokescreen and Shadow Stomp. You have to get behind your opponent, then Shift E to use Beheading. But unlike Smokescreen and Shadow Stomp, you aren't limited to chaining it off of Ninja Step or Shuriken Throw. This lets you mix things up a bit with other skills. For example, you can leverage the movement of Oni Shadow to get behind your opponent and then Beheading. Or you can use Smokescreen, and you can press spacebar again to activate Concealment, and you can use that movement to get behind your opponent and then Beheading. Murderous Intent. My favorite Awakening Ninja skill. Kind of like Shadow Stomp, there are two versions of this skill. If you just press Shift L and B, it will do a horizontal slash, which isn't bad, but usually you'll want to press R and B first. What R and B does is that it puts you into what's called Transition Stance. If you press Shift L and B while you're in this stance, you'll do an overhead downward slash. This version of the skill has a very interesting hitbox, where if you use it at the correct distance and angle, you can actually get the attack to land behind your opponent, despite starting your attack from in front of them. And that's just the icing on the cake. You can always just use Silent Charge to get behind your opponent, RNB to enter Transition Stance, then Shift W to Silent Charge, then Camera Turn into Shift O and B for Murderous. Now, you might have noticed a common theme with these skills. They're either fast, have long range, are protected, or a combination of all three. And that's exactly why we choose to use these skills in particular to catch our opponents. When you look at your kit, you'll see way more skills that have CCs than just these ones. But just because the skill can CC, it doesn't mean they're good candidates as catches. A skill like Foxclaw, for example, has a stiffness CC, but it doesn't meet any of our earlier criteria. This is why the skill isn't suitable to be used as a catch, and is instead used in combos, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so getting behind your opponent makes sense against frontal guards. But what about iframes and super armor? Well, iframes is just full immunity against everything, so there isn't really much to do there. But we do have a solution for super armor. There's one mechanic that I haven't mentioned yet. Grabs. That's Descent in Pre-Awakening and Flash Bondage in Awakening, both used with E. Grabs are a special case, as they aren't exactly a type of CC, but rather, they are skills that can bypass frontal guard or super armor when applying their own CC. However, the main reason that I mentioned these two skills separately is because I don't want you to think about them in the same way as the other skills that we just talked about. Don't think about your grabs as simply a CC to catch your opponent with. Instead, keep them in mind as tools to use against super armor specifically. This way, you can put your opponent in sort of a catch-22 situation, where they can neither rely on their frontal guard, nor can they rely on their super armor. If they just try to use super armor to prevent you from getting behind them, then they become predictable, and you can easily just grab them. But if they try to mix in frontal guard skills, then well, you already know how to deal with those. That's why, even despite the existence of super armor, your win condition doesn't change. Because as long as you have your grabs, your opponent can never just use super armor. And as long as you keep trying to get behind them, nor can they just rely on their frontal guards. Movement. They say the best defense is a good offense. And that's very much true for Ninja. In Pre-Awakening, there's no way to just stay still and be protected indefinitely. And while you do have Q block as Awakening, using it really hurts more than it helps. Instead, Ninja survives by constantly being on the move. After all, you're a ninja, not a tank. So don't think in terms of how you can block damage, think about how you can avoid the damage altogether. So remember how earlier, we used skills like Ghost Greeting, Shadow Stomp, and Murderous Intent to catch our opponents? One thing you may have noticed is that while these skills are your catches, they also happen to move you a fair distance as a part of the skill itself. Well, it turns out that this very movement that we use to attack our opponent is also going to be the movement that will keep us safe. We will take a page from the martial arts here and use their philosophy when thinking about ninja. The hand that strikes also blocks. So take a look at the skills that move you. We have Ghost Step, Ninja Step, Silent Charge, Murderous Intent, Ghost Greeting, Shadow Stomp, Shadow Slash, Concealment, Oni Shadow. Just earlier, we were using these skills to catch our opponent. But now, by simply chaining them together, these very same skills are also what's going to move us a great distance. And that's a key idea here for Ninja. It's not a class where you separate movement from attacks and defense. Your attacks are your movement, and your movement is your defense. But of course, in actual combat, you won't just be moving in a straight line. After all, you're fighting an opponent, not running a marathon. So instead, you'll want to sort of move around your opponent while attacking them at the same time, alternating between movement and CC. Let me give you an example to illustrate what I mean by that. Let's say you start a fight with Silent Charge into Murderous Intent. This serves as both your movement to get into range of your opponent, as well as an attack to try and catch your opponent. It misses, so right after, you go into Ghost Step, then C-Swap. This serves both as a defense to block your opponent's counterattack, as well as a setup for your next attack with Shuriken Malice. Your opponent super armors it, so you Ghost Step again. This time, it acts as a defense to prevent your opponent from grabbing you, but also as movement to put you behind your opponent, allowing you to immediately go for a Shadow Stomp. But your opponent manages to block this too, so this time you Ninja Step instead. Just like Ghost Step, Ninja Step also serves as your defense to prevent your opponent's counterattack while moving you behind your opponent at the same time so you can attack with Smokescreen. Unfortunately, Smokescreen misses too, so you immediately use Concealment for its movement to get behind them again and then attack with Beheading. However, it gets super armored. Now that you used up most of your pre-awakening catches, you Ghost Step and C-Swap, both for defense, but also to set up for a murderous intent later. At this point, your opponent has been kind of staying still in super armor, so you try for a grab. But they were smart enough to iframe out in time. Now you go into Blockjump. This both defends against your opponent's counterattack, and also attacks your opponent right after. But your opponent was able to iframe out again, so now you go step once again for defense. Your opponent tries to back away, and since you're in Awakening stance from the C-swap earlier, you go into Silent Charge and Murderous Intent, and the whole process repeats until you catch your opponent. So you can see how nearly every skill that you use serves two purposes, both to set up your next attack, and also to defend against your opponent's counterattack. Ghost Step is a recurring theme here. You want to constantly be thinking of it, weaving it in between your attacks. C-swap and Transition Stance are also pretty important, as they give you frontal guard, so you want to make sure to face your opponent when you use them. And even though a lot of your catches are technically unprotected, this combination of movement and attack is what allows you to stay safe while using them. You can think of it like this. You have attacks within your movement, and you have movement within your attacks. To move and fight as a ninja is to parry your opponent's attack and counter with your own. Cancels. Many ninja skills can be animation cancelled. Animation cancelling allows you to interrupt the skill midway and begin a different skill instead. There are three main ways to cancel a skill: Ghost Step, Malice, or Smokescreen. Technically, there is also the option of doing it with Brace and also Seamless, but it's very situational, so we'll not worry about them. All you need to do is to press the keys to use one of those skills, and you will instantly transition into that skill, cancelling whatever skill you are currently using. So as a quick example, let's say you use your Reborn skill, Illusion of Restraint. This puts you into Pre-Awakening, and now you can press Q at any time to immediately use Malice instead. When you do this, you'll notice that your frontal guard is also gone, which makes sense if you think about it, because you cancelled the illusion, which is what gave you the frontal guard in the first place. Now, one reason you might want to do this is if you cancel illusion at the right time, you can still get the damage from it, but without having to wait for the full animation to play out. Not all skills will be like this though, so let's look at some other reasons you may want to animation cancel. Blade Spin. The most common way to cancel Blade Spin is probably with Shuriken Malice. This is mainly used to cancel out the ending animation in order to do more damage, kind of like with Illusion of Restraint. But remember, cancelling with Malice this way will end the super armor early as well. However, you don't have to wait until the end to cancel Blade Spin. You can actually cancel it at any point in its animation. So you can use Blade Spin defensively during your movement, which you then cancel with Ghost Step or Smokescreen to try and catch your opponent. You're not going to get full damage from Blade Spin this way, but the point will be to CC your opponent, so that doesn't really matter. Beheading the Dead. Since this skill has a rather long animation with only a very short iframe in the middle, it can oftentimes be risky to use. So to make it safer, you'll usually cancel it by either holding WF for Ghost Step, or Spacebar for Smokescreen. Unlike Blade Spin, this skill can only be cancelled during specific points in the animation, so by holding on one of those two skills, you'll cancel it right after the CC goes off. This does mean you don't get the damage from it though, so if you did manage to land the CC on your opponent, you may choose to not cancel it instead. Blockjump. Since this skill has both an iframe, teleport, and CC built into it, it may seem a bit redundant to try and cancel this skill. The problem, however, is that you're actually vulnerable when you reappear behind your opponent. After using Blockjump, you may have second thoughts, and decide that maybe appearing behind your opponent isn't such a great idea after all. You could suppress S to back away, but sometimes even that isn't an option. Here is where you could cancel it with either Smokescreen or Ghost Step. However, cancelling with Ghost Step has an interesting property. If you aim it at your opponent and Ghost Step, you will actually teleport to them anyway, and then Ghost Step behind them, instead of at your current position. And all of that will be iframe. You do have to be precise with your key presses though, by tapping WF at exactly the same time. Otherwise, the game will just interpret it as if you only press W. If you're having trouble doing this, you can go into your settings and set up a keybind for WW evasion. This way, pressing that keybind will accomplish the exact same thing as if you press WF. Transition Stance. If you were to swap from Awakening stance to Transition stance and then back again, there is a slight delay before you can do anything else. Here is where you could use Ghost Step to cancel that delay, and either use another skill or go right back into transition stance again. Since the swapping animation is frontal guard, and Ghost Step is iframe, this lets you continuously cycle between frontal guard and iframe, and can be used to temporarily stall out an opponent. This actually ends up being better than just using frontal guard alone, since the iframe gives a bit of time for your frontal guard to recharge. But still, remember that you're a ninja, so try to rely on your movement for protection, not this. Now be careful. Not all skills can be cancelled in a useful way, and some skills can't even be cancelled at all. For example, you have to let the full animation of Serpent Ascension and Katana Shower play out, leaving you vulnerable to CC String Serpent or grab String Katana Shower. Black Moonlight, on the other hand, can be cancelled, but only before the CC even lands. For these type of skills, you'll definitely want to think twice before throwing them out. All in all, these are some of the most commonly cancelled skills, but it's by no means an exhaustive list of all the skills that can be cancelled. In fact, pretty much half the skills in our kit can be cancelled in some way. So I encourage you to experiment with other skills to get a feel for which skill you can cancel and when, and adapt them to your needs. Combos. The reason we use combos is simply because our skills just flat out do more damage when combined in a certain way. The air attack or down attack that you see on the skill descriptions are what's known as special attack modifiers, which gives the skill bonus damage when the target ACs are floated or grounded respectively. So it makes sense that people want to put a lot of emphasis on optimizing their combos, since it's the flashiest portion of a fight, and ultimately, it's what actually kills your opponent. However, I personally think that comboing your opponent is probably the last thing you need to worry about when learning Ninja. If you and your opponent both have the same gear score, and you're both actually trying to kill each other, so neither of you are running full DP builds, then you don't need very elaborate combos to kill your opponent. So the skill ceiling of finding an opponent is going to be more so on how well you can catch your opponent and how well you can prevent yourself from getting caught, rather than how well you can combo. BDO is a very fast-paced game, and Ninja is a fast-paced class on top of that. Skills will constantly be going on or coming off cooldown throughout the fight, that by the time you do catch your opponent, it's a complete toss-up which skill you caught them with and which skills you have available off cooldown. So that means what you really need to know about combos is how to begin a combo out of every single possible catch, and still be able to do that combo even if certain skills are on cooldown. That's a lot of variations you'll need to prepare for, which is why I believe that you shouldn't begin learning combos by looking at long optimized sequences of skills that you have to memorize and repeat verbatim. Instead, you want to understand the anatomy of a combo and what makes the combo work, so that you can prepare many simple combos which you can then adapt on the fly to any situation. And that's why, before any of that, you're going to want to make sure you understand how CCs even work in BDO. Now, there are multiple guides that explain the mechanic in detail, but here's a simplified TLDR. First, there are 3 categories of CCs: stiff, smashes, and everything else. You can CC anyone 2 times back to back before they get a chance to recover, but stiff counts as 0.7 of a CC. Oddly specific, I know. And smashes count as 0 CCs, but only work on already CC'd opponents. So anytime you reach or exceed 2 CCs, you're not able to CC your opponent again for 5 seconds. Another way to think about this is that you can do a total of 3 CCs if the first or second CC are stiffs, but only 2 CCs if neither of them are stiffs. Second, CCs will override each other, not stack. So if you stun someone and then stiff them, the stiff will immediately overwrite the stun, and you also get 0.7 added to your CC count. But if you use 2 of the same CCs back to back very quickly, only the first CC will take effect and contribute to the CC count. The second CC is completely ignored. And third, stiff and stun doesn't work against someone who is already floated, bound, or knocked down. So if you understand this, you won't have to come up with a new combo for every different skill that you use. Just knowing which type of CC you used will be enough to determine how to proceed with the combo. Allow me to explain. Let's start off with a very standard combo, where in Awakening, and you caught your opponent by stiffing them with Murderous intent. Stiff is very short, so you immediately go into Serpent Ascension, and that's 1.7 CCs. Now you DPS with Blade Spin, which puts you into Pre-Awakening, then you go into Malice, and then go into Shadow Stomp, and now you hit the CC limit. And if they're still not dead, you can throw in more DPS, like maybe Fatal Blow into Illusion of Restraint. Now, what if this time, you start in Pre-Awakening, and you caught your opponent with Blockjump? You decide to go for a grab with Death's Descent, and that's 1.7 CCs. And despite opening completely different from last time, you can still Blade Spin to Malice into Shadow Stomp for the DPS and second CC. Then you C-Swap and finish them off with Serpent Ascension, which only does damage now because you hit the CC limit already. So you'll notice how in both examples, we opened with completely different skills and ended with completely different skills, but we still used Blade Spin to Malice into Shadow Stomp for the DPS and second CC. This is what I mean. It didn't matter that it was Murderous Intent and Serpent Ascension the first time, or that it was Blockjump and Death's Descent the second time. In both cases, it was still 1.7 CCs, so you're still good to DPS, then Shadow Stomp before hitting the CC limit. So you didn't really need to memorize both examples in full, because now you know that anytime you get that first CC, you can potentially do a Blade Spin to Malice into Shadow Stomp. So if we were to first do this example, and open with say, I don't know, Boss Slaughter this time, you can do the exact same thing. But no matter how complicated the combos get, the general idea is still the same. You want to get in one CC, do filler DPS, get in a second CC, do more filler DPS, and then they either die, or you back away since you reached the CC limit. The goal today isn't really to show you every possible combo, or even the best combos. There are just way too many combos to cover in this video, and people are coming up with new combos all the time. Instead, I want to focus more on how you can think about combos, so that you can execute some simple combos and be able to win fights right away. But hey, if you do want to take the time to optimize the timing of every skill in your combo and get the absolute most damage possible, then by all means, go for it. But if not, you don't have to sweat it either. A slightly unoptimized combo is still going to be better than running into a situation where you don't know how to combo someone at all. Fishing for CCs. Alright, so that's cool and all. But what if I don't know what skills my opponents have? With 23 classes in the game as of this recording, and more on the way, do I really need to spend months learning every frontal guard and super armor for every class? What if I just about had enough of watching guys at this point, and want to jump into PvP like, right now? Well my friend, then let me teach you this one weird trick that everyone hates. Fishing for CCs, or as I like to call it, how to win fights on Ninja without knowing anything. If you've ever gone fishing before, no matter if it's in real life or in BDO, you'll know that a large part of it is just throwing out the hook and seeing if a fish bites. You're not hunting down a particular fish, you just know that there are fishes in the area, and if you try fishing there, you'll either get a fish or you can try another spot. So as the name implies, fishing for CCs is just throwing out the CC and seeing if it works on your opponent or not. You're not predicting that they'll use a particular skill, you just know that if you try CCing, you'll either catch them or be able to back away safely. And while this may sound like a bad strategy, where it's just throwing out Hail Marys, it actually turns out that fishing for CCs is in some ways an inherent part of BDO combat. See, the thing with BDO is that every class will have ways to stay protected most of the time. It won't be the same as how ninjas do it, but they will have their own ways. Even though ideally, you may want to know the exact skill your opponent will use and hard counter it, your opponent may just have too many options available. So fishing for CCs is your way of forcing your opponent to choose an option, reducing the number of remaining options they have, and making them more predictable. And this isn't a reckless play to make either, because the biggest reason that fishing for CCs even work at all is due to the design decisions of BDO. See, back in 2018, the developers balanced the game with the idea of most skills either having a CC or having protection, but not both. Which means that even if your CC gets blocked by your opponent's protected skills, that skill wouldn't also CC you back. Failing to land a CC doesn't mean you lose, it just means that you have to try again. So fishing for CCs is something that every class can do, and many classes do to some extent. It's just that of all the classes in BDO, Ninja is a class that can do this continuously and even base their entire playstyle around it. Between our assortment of fast catches, ability to cancel most skills, motif of getting behind the opponent, and even the way we attack and move, it all just complements fishing for CCs so well. The only thing you really have to worry about are those skills that CC multiple times, or are both protected and CC you at the same time, like the Awakening Core skills. Those are the ones you do have to commit to memory, regardless of what strategy you're using. But you'll figure them out as you fight more and more opponents. At the end of the day, I'm by no means recommending fishing for CCs as the strategy that you should employ. I'm just saying that with it being a natural part of the game, it can be a good starting point if you want to get right into the battle. After all, when you're first starting out, what's important is for you to get comfortable with your movement, catches, cancels, and combos. Then over time, you can develop better strategies against individual classes. As they say, practice makes perfect. Conclusion. So we've come to the end of the video. Today, we discussed the fundamental ideas of PvPing as a ninja. We focused on why we do the things we do, not just how to do them. So when you close out of this video today, it doesn't matter if you've forgotten the exact examples I gave, because what's important is that you now know how to think as a ninja. Remember, get behind your opponent's frontal guard, use your movement to stay alive, and combine your offense and defense together. And ultimately, be flexible in your thinking. Adapt what we talked about today to your style. As Bruce Lee would say, be water, my friend. So good luck, and have fun.